Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Devin Sears, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Jonathan DeRosiers. And today we are talking about securing client websites, specifically WordPress security best practices. And security is often an interesting subject to give a webinar on because I feel like the audience today falls into two categories: people that have had something happen with their website, a hack or a malware injection or something like that, and it's ruined their day or their week or their month trying to fix it. That's one category. And the other category is people that are trying to avoid that and being proactive. But before we get too much into the content, there are a few housekeeping items that I'd like to talk about. Uh, First and foremost, we're super excited to have Jonathan DeRosiers join us today. I'll let him give himself a little bit of an intro in a minute, but he's one of our principal software engineers. He lives and breathes WordPress, and so he has a lot of experience and knowledge that he'll be sharing with us today. As always, my name is Devin Sears. I'm the Senior Field Marketing Manager here at Bluehost, and we are happy to have you joining us today. Before we jump too deep into the content, there's a couple housekeeping items. First, if you can hear us, find the chat box and let us know where you're tuning in from. And also, if you want, you can let us know how many webinars you've joined before. Just a simple number. If this is your first, you can put 1 and so on and so forth. But that lets us know that our signal is transmitting, and it also lets us know where our audience is tuning in from. And we always love hearing that. So find the chat box and drop that information in there. You can use the chat box throughout the webinar to communicate with us. If you have a question, I would suggest finding the Q&A tab, which is right next to it, and putting your question in there. It doesn't matter too much, but if you put your question in the Q&A tab, it allows us to have a little bit more of a back and forth conversation to resolve your issue, whereas chat just whatever is the latest comment, that's what will be on top of chat. On that note, if you do need more help at any point, if you feel like you want to have some one-on-one assistance with one of our WordPress experts, at the top of the chat, there should be a large thing that says click here to get help with your website. You can click that at any time, and that will take you to some one-on-one help for your website. If you're having any technical issues as the webinar proceeds, the best thing to do is to leave and rejoin the webinar. That resolves most issues. And if you're joining in with a mobile device, then you'll just need to click somewhere on the stream to unmute. Just click somewhere on the screen to unmute the stream. That should resolve that. And the number one question that we always get every webinar, I will answer now and again, I'm sure. That is, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar to everyone who registered, and it should be in your inbox 24 to 48 hours after you after we conclude today. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. We want this to be educational for you. We want this to be helpful for you. And so if there's anything else that we can do to improve on this, please don't hesitate to let us know in chat. So housekeeping out of the way, let's get into the reason of today's webinar, and that is security. And the webinar quote today is: "You're not just building sites; you're protecting brands, reputations, and securing livelihoods." And as I mentioned before at the beginning, security is always a little bit of a tricky subject because the people that really, really are interested in it are usually the people that needed it yesterday, right? It goes back to the old adage, um, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So it's doing things to proactively make sure that your website is secure can save yourself a lot of headache and heartache down the line. And especially as people building websites for others, if you can protect those brands and your clients, that makes things a lot easier for you, for your clients, for everyone involved. So, what all are we going to be going into today to address that? First of all, why does security matter for agencies? Second, we're going to talk a little bit about thinking like a hacker, getting into that mindset, thinking about what they're thinking about. and then making sure we have a security first mindset. Then we're going to go into some of the security fundamentals. We're going to address a concept called the principle of least privilege that talks a little bit about access and who should have it, and how you should address that. And then obviously we're going to touch on plugin and theme security, monitoring and automation, and we'll end with some workflows for agencies. And then obviously we'll end with Q&A. I personally will be off camera and off microphone. I'll be trying to respond to as many questions as I can. If there's questions that I don't know the answer to, or if there's questions that I think will be beneficial for the entire audience, I'll hold those questions for the end, for that Q&A section here. And I'll make sure that we ask JD to answer some of those questions for us. So I think that is everything from my side. So JD, please take it away.
Hey, thanks, Devin. So my name is Jonathan DeRochers. I've been contributing to WordPress in some way, shape, or form since 2012. And I'm a core committer, and I'm also a member of the WordPress security team. And so some of this comes from, all of it comes from experience, but some of it comes in a way that might be a little different from a typical security webinar, in that I'm going to challenge the way that you think about security and the way that you approach it in your daily life in every project. And hopefully that will help you to better anticipate potential security issues and how you can better protect you and your clients from these different vulnerabilities. So why does security matter to agencies? 43% in this study done by Verizon at the end of 2022, that 43% of cyber attacks target small businesses specifically. WordPress also is currently the largest CMS out there. It's 60-something% of all websites using a CMS run WordPress. And it also accounts for over 43% of the internet as a whole. And so this is a really big target for hackers. And sites like the New York Post, the NASA.gov, the White House, they all use WordPress as well. And so not only is it a big target, there's also some really high value targets that they can affect if they're able to gain access to something in general that's in WordPress. And hack sites, it's not just about keeping the sites up and running. Hack sites cost you many other things, from reputation to the time that it takes to actually remediate the problems, the money that it costs to fix the problems. And it's also the current and future clients. If you are maintaining a site for someone and it's hacked, they're going to blame you because you're the one responsible for it. And so they might choose to go with a different agency or vendor. And word of mouth is often very important for small agencies. And so there's a non-zero chance that they tell others about their experience with you as an agency, and it could affect your future business as well. And all of this, when it's added up, often costs far more than it would to just have some more preventative steps in place and change your mindset and to go the extra mile initially and build that into your project so that you prevent this entirely. So I mentioned that I'm going to challenge the way that you think about security a little bit here. But in this example, we're going to pretend we're a bank robber, and we're looking for a bank to rob. And in this town square, there's two banks. And by looking at them, which bank would you want to rob? Right? I think it's pretty obvious. There's the bank on the left is much larger. It's obvious that they have more money. There's more people going in and out. They're doing more business. And so the normal thinking here for this robber is to target that bank instead. And when you apply this to a website, right, the bigger bank is WordPress, and the smaller bank is maybe everybody else using a content management system. And so often we hear things like, oh, my site is just a really small site. It's just a personal blog. The hackers aren't going to care about my site. They're not even going to bother. But actually, the opposite is true. They don't really care what the site is. Many times they're trying to crawl websites, and they're trying to exploit specific vulnerabilities in as many sites as they can. Doesn't care. Don't care what kind of site it is. It could be a store. It could be a blog. They don't care. They're just trying to exploit that specific vulnerability that they're aware of, and they know how to take advantage of. But in this scenario, your website may be really small, might be a blog, it might be really big. They might have an entire floor of this bank building, or you might just be one single safety deposit box within this bank. And so that's a way to think of it, is they may not be off after your specific safety deposit box. They might be after the money in the vault, but your site is going to be affected as a result of trying to take advantage of vulnerabilities in as many sites and properties as they can. And so I mentioned that I really want to encourage in our daily lives to think about security with our websites as we would in physical situations, and practice a security first mindset when we're online. Another example of this that I'll give you is your car keys, right? Everybody that owns a car has their car keys, and depending on what you're doing, you treat them differently. So, for example, if you go to a concert, you won't leave the keys in your ignition or on your dashboard. If you go to dinner, you won't leave the keys on the table when you go to the bathroom. But if you were to go to dinner at a friend's house, you would probably be okay leaving those on the counter or leaving them anywhere within their house. But what about within your own house? Think about where you put your keys when you go inside. Many people put them right near the door so that they are there and they know where they are when they have to leave and they're running late. Some people put them on their dresser. But what happens? We get this perception that our keys are safe because they're physically within our home. But what happens when that's not really enough? What happens when you have to think more about this? And so this here is a attack that was popular a few years ago, where you're going to witness somebody stealing this car. And this is in the middle of the night, and they don't even have a key. But what's happening here is this specific key fob for this car has a vulnerability where it is consistently emitting a signal that can be used to control the car. And so the person that's near the house is relaying that signal to the car, and the car is receiving it, and someone is able to get in and gain access. And they're actually going back here because they need to get that signal again to be able to turn the car on. And then they're going to be able to just drive away. And all of this happens in under 2 minutes. It's very, very quick. You likely wouldn't even have time to put your shoes on and realize what's going on. But it poses that question of, what is safe? My keys were in my house. They were safe to me. And so why did this happen? How could this happen? So what is acceptable level of risk for you in different situations? And that's what security really is. Security is just a consistent evaluation of trade-offs between, what is acceptable risk and what is dangerous to you, and the level of effort you want to go through to prevent certain things. And so always be thinking about this. Like, what would I do in the real world for a similar situation? So this is a quote that I always like from a cybersecurity expert, Gene Spafford, where the only truly secure system is one that's powered off, cast in a block of concrete, sealed in a lead-lined room, and with armed guards. But even then, I have my doubts. We build things that we want as many people as possible to visit, right? A website in complete isolation like this is not really valuable unless it's some type of intranet site that you build for training for a company or something like that. But in most situations, we want our websites to be discoverable and usable by as many people as we can, because that equates to more users, which generates more leads or more sales, and ultimately makes that business more successful. And so we want to be able to be confident and comfortable with the decisions we've made around the security of our websites when we stand there and we yell at the top of the rooftop to come visit our site and come to our online store and check out what we have to offer. This number right here is the total number. The WordPress.org directory, plugin directory, has 60,000 plugins. And if you ran just 3 of them, this is the total number of unique combinations you could have. And this number is really interesting because it's a demonstration of why WordPress can be so powerful. It's super flexible, and plugins allow you to add specific functionality and interact with the software in new ways that typically are not included by default. But it also means that this is the number of possible interactions that your software can have. And so with the example of stealing the car, right? So the keys were secure and the car was locked, but not necessarily this third factor came into play, and it wasn't secure at all. And so this is just another way to illustrate that there's infinite number of combinations of how a website can be built or structured or operate. And you need to be constantly thinking about, how are the users going to use the website? How are they able to use the website? What's allowed and what's not? And so, like I said, WordPress is a very flexible platform that makes it very useful for many people, but it's not without cost. And we have to be thinking about these things and the trade-offs and what we're comfortable with. All of this to say that security is not an absolute task. It's not a checklist that you can complete once and be done with it. It's not a list of best practices that if you do them, your site will never get hacked. It's a journey. Software is always changing. Our technology is always changing. New things are being introduced all the time. Right now, AI is all the rage. And how does your site interact with AI? Do you have AI tools set up on your site? Are they secure? Are they making sure that the person doesn't input anything dangerous that can delete your database or dump your data and share it with hackers? It's just a constant thing that you should always be thinking about every day with the decisions you make, and with every project. As you every time you get into do maintenance on a project, you should be thinking about security and have your eyes open for anything that doesn't look right, so that you can dig deeper into that and see what exactly is going on. So let's move into, now that we've talked a little bit about high level thinking about security, let's get into a little bit more of specific fundamentals and things that you can do to have more secure sites and experiences. The number one thing that I recommend to you is to always keep your software up to date. And this is not just on your website with plugins and themes and WordPress itself, but it's also for your desktop applications, your version of PHP that runs on your server. Maybe you have an email client. Everything that you run you should make as much effort as possible to always have it run the most up-to-date version. And that's just because unless you're really in there tracking what is coming out in each release, there's no guarantee that you're missing a security patch. Maybe there's something out there that they haven't shared, the software developers haven't shared with everyone yet, and they're working on a fix. And they just, it's in your best interest to always run the most recent version. Applied to WordPress, while the security team does occasionally ship security updates back to WordPress 4.7, only the most recent version of WordPress is supported. And so currently in October of 2025, that means that the 6.8 version is the most recent version. Those older branches are sometimes updated as a courtesy. And it's done because, we do have such a large market share that there are trade-offs to not backporting those fixes to those versions, but it's not guaranteed. And so, it's always recommended that you run the most recent version of WordPress. Another thing you can do that's a very easy fundamental practice to have is to enforce strong passwords and use them in your daily life. One of the great things about Bluehost is, we have several ways that we look out for you from a security perspective by default without you really even needing to worry about it. And one of them is when you have the Bluehost plugin active, there's a handful of things that are happening behind the scenes to configure caching and different parts of a hosting environment that helps make your site more performant and easier to use. But one of them is it automatically will enforce stronger passwords. And the way it does this is it will, there's an API out there for passwords that have been leaked. And so when you change your password, it will tell you, hey, the password you're trying to set for your user account is actually in this list over here of passwords that have been leaked. And so that means that password is probably not secure to be using anymore. It's quite common for hackers to use those lists of passwords and to try to discover usernames and just try a bunch of passwords to see if any of them fit. If your password is password123, that's probably one of the first ones that gets tried all the time. And definitely I would go and change that immediately after this webinar. But that's just an example of a password that would be in this list that you would want to avoid. But they get really specific as well. Like maybe you have a password that like no one else in the world could know, but there's a site that you use that password on because you use it everywhere that the data was leaked. And so now that password is out there and they may not know it's associated with you, but it's in this list of passwords that they might try to gain access to accounts. So I definitely recommend using strong passwords. And one of the great things that you can do is to have a password manager. And you can use that to, when you go to a site, it will automatically allow you to automatically fill in the fields to log in. And that allows you to have very secure passwords up to the maximum that the site will allow. And, with increased length is, as I said, that security is a blend of different things. So it's not a end-all be-all fix, but it will help contribute to more secure environments and more secure accounts. Another thing that you can do is to enable two-factor authentication on your websites. We all have bank accounts and different user accounts everywhere where you get an email with a code, or you get a text message with a code, or you have to go into an authentication app and copy a code over just to prove that you know your password, but then you also physically are in possession of something that's proven to be yours. And so there are plugins in place. There's one from the official from the WordPress core team that adds this support, but then there's also several others in the community that are very, very well maintained that you can use to enable this on your WordPress sites. And then the most basic fundamental thing that you can do on any website is to have an SSL certificate. So what an SSL certificate does is it allows your site to have secure connections between the browser that someone's using to access the website and your server. And this prevents against something called a man-in-the-middle attack, where if someone is not using an SSL certificate and it's a insecure connection, somebody could actually sit and they could observe the network traffic going back and forth. So for example, if you were on public Wi-Fi and you went to maybe at a cafe and you went into your bank account, but the bank that you use doesn't have HTTPS connections through SSL certificates, someone that is also on the network could just be watching all of the traffic on the network, and they could see your username and password in plain text. They would then be able to do whatever they want with it, transfer money out, log in, check what's going on, anything. But an SSL certificate, it allows the traffic between the two sources to be encrypted. And so nobody can just watch and steal your data from that. And every new site that you create at Bluehost also receives a free SSL certificate. There's also upgrades that you can purchase that increase the level of verification that happens around the certificate, which can result in a stronger confidence for search engines sometimes. Also with your customers, that might change the logo displayed next to the URL address, that a different badge or something of that nature. And there's also ways to have some insurance and brand protection for based on the level of SSL certificate that you purchase. So you can always upgrade that if you need more security along those lines. Next thing I want to talk about is probably one of the worst, besides weak passwords. It's probably the second worst thing that I see out in the wild around preventable security hacks and having sites compromised that are very preventable. When we add people to a website, it's very important that we think about what that person needs to accomplish and the access that we're giving them. So the principle of least privilege in software is about only giving user accounts the access and the privilege to do perform actions that they need to do. So you wouldn't, if someone only needs to comment on a website, you wouldn't want to give them administrator access to update plugins and change the theme of the site. When we build sites for clients, we should spend the extra time understanding how they're going to interact with the website and how they're going to maintain the website, publish content, and all of those things. This is important just to know, because it will help you set up more secure ways for them to manage their website going forward. And as I said, it's very important that you're just intentional about who you give access to and what their access level is. To help with this, WordPress comes with a very flexible and powerful roles and capability API. And by default, this surfaces as these 5 user roles. There's subscriber, contributor, author, editor, and administrator. And as you see in the parentheses, they each have different levels of capabilities that they're able to, things they're able to perform on the website. So, if somebody is doing a guest post on the website, you don't want to give them editor access, because then they could edit anybody else's content and do other tasks that an editor would be appropriate for an editor to do. Maybe a contributor, and also a contributor can't actually publish it. So it ensures that someone with greater privilege has to review it and actually hit publish before doing so. Maybe they don't know the editorial schedule, or maybe they're a journalist that you're giving a trial to, and you want to see their work before it gets published out, or a fact checking needs to occur, something like that. And the capabilities, you never really see the capabilities themselves, but they map to specific actions and abilities. But the roles are containers are sets of capabilities. And if you've ever seen, if you ever had a WooCommerce site, you would have noticed that there are additional roles that get added, like shop manager. Some plugins will add a privacy manager, a privacy person. Can't remember the exact name for it, but there's a specific name for someone that manages requests to remove data for like GDPR on sites. And so plugins will add their own, they'll add their own capabilities. Sometimes they'll add capabilities, some of their custom capabilities, to these default user roles, but oftentimes they'll create their own roles entirely. And there are also plugins that you can use to define your own capabilities. If you're writing a custom plugin, you can do a capability check for a specific action that only happens in your plugin. Maybe you have a store, and you want someone only to go in there and mark that something has shipped, or enter a verification that, like, yes, payment has been received, and you only want them to be able to check off a certain box in order screen. And so you would want them to be able to view orders and then also perform that custom capability that you are building out in your plugin. And the plugins also you don't have to have custom capabilities. You can also just use a plugin to add different capabilities to different roles. So perhaps you want your contributors to be able to also view form entries that have been submitted, or maybe your contributor, your shop manager, needs to also be able to um, edit the layout of the website for some reason to set up a certain promotion on a certain day. So these are all different ways that you can use this system to control down to be very granular around what someone should be able to do on a given website. And oftentimes, security breaches are not just the work of hackers. Sometimes this being too generous with the permissions that you grant can lead to a hack, because someone will hack the password for an administrator account, and then they can technically log in and do anything that they want on that website. But perhaps you have an employee that you fire and they aren't happy about it, right? And they had really privileged access, an editor or an administrator. They can log in and they could deface the website or delete everything or do any number of different things that their access would allow them to. And so not just thinking about how we give out this access is also how we continuously check these lists of who has certain access and what is our plan for removing this access if we need to. Some other ways that you can help with user management is controlling the way people are accessing your site. So there are plugins that allow you to only allow someone to log in if they're coming from a specific IP address. And so maybe it's a bank site and they only ever should be able to log into the website if they're on the bank's IP address or range of IP addresses. That's something that you could look into. Maybe there's times of day that you want them to be able to log in and not. Maybe there are regions. All of these different types of things can be configured to restrict that. There's also ways to track user activity that is happening on the WordPress site. There's a plugin called Stream, and that plugin will basically track this person updated this post, this person deleted this comment, this plugin was updated, this, all of those things. And it's just a good thing to think about is what level of audit trail do you need for the site that you're managing? And this is keeping track of who logs in and where they're coming from, what they do. And that all is built into the trade-off of what you're allowing, what you're comfortable with, the level of risk associated with that, and how you're tracking that to backtrack anything that happens if something problematic occurs. Another more popular topic is how do we consider security in the lens of plugins and themes? So I mentioned before that, there's 60,000 plugins on the WordPress.org directory alone. There's countless number of premium plugins that are distributed outside of the WordPress.org directory. And so when you're deciding which plugins to have on your site and how they interact with each other, what are some things that we can do to make sure that we're doing so in a secure way? One thing that you can do is each plugin, especially on WordPress.org directory, will have the last updated date. Are the developers updating it regularly? Do they have a fair number of installs? While all of these factors are not, all of these things must not be met at all times that I'm going to mention, but it is, again, a formula that you need to decide what you're comfortable with. So for example, the more installs that a plugin has, the more feedback they are likely receiving about what works and what's broken. So, if a plugin has 1 million sites using it, chances are there's very few edge cases that have not been discovered and reported. Whereas if something is run on 1,000 sites, the number of environments that's running on and the number of types of sites and configurations that are using it is very low. And so it could be potentially a little bit buggier than the first scenario. But again, that shouldn't necessarily rule it out. Maybe it works really well for you. It's a niche plugin that does a specific thing that you really need, and there's really no other options. Test it and make sure it works well. Keep an eye on it. And it's always a balance of these factors and what works and what you need. Also look at how they handle their support requests. Do they respond to people asking for help? Do they fix issues that people report about in forums and support forums? Are they contributing back to WordPress itself? Are they participating in the WordPress community and ecosystem? Making sure that they have the right intentions and are not just trying to extract capital from site owners to run a business is important, because you want them to have it shows that they have a long-term interest in the community as a whole being successful and WordPress continuing to grow and being secure. So that's something that I think is really important, because it shows you where they're coming from and what the likelihood is that you're going to have a positive experience. Another thing you can do is to check for known CVEs, which is a abbreviation for common vulnerabilities and exposures. And that's basically when a vulnerability is discovered, there typically is a CVE that's associated with it that describes the issue and when it was fixed and any action that you may need to take. And so there's several services like PatchStack and WP Scan, and there's many others out there that are basically a searchable database site for vulnerabilities that you can look up each plugin, you can look up a theme, you can look up WordPress itself and see if there are any outstanding issues that you should either avoid the plugin, or you should check that you're running a specific version higher than a specific version to ensure that those sites are not vulnerable. It could be that the vulnerability doesn't affect you in some cases, where possibly that the way that it's being exploited is not realistic because you're locking the site down in a certain way, or you don't use a certain feature. That's possible as well. But I always recommend, like, if there are CVEs that have been fixed and vulnerabilities that have been patched, you should, of course, always be running the latest version to ensure you have that. So there are some other things you can do. Much like WordPress core, you should always be keeping your plugins and themes up to date. When you have the Bluehost plugin installed on your site, by default, all plugins and themes are auto-updated. And some people get concerned with this recommendation because they say, what if the plugin is the plugin update breaks things, right? And that kind of blends into the previous recommendations of looking into the developer's background and who maintains that plugin. What's their reputation around the quality that they're shipping? What's the types of changes that they ship in each release? Are they shipping a bunch of things at once, or are they, doing more gradually, more regular releases? All of that is stuff to consider for that. I recommend having all of these on by default. But there may be some cases for you where having that turned off is okay. Another example could be if you manage your plugins and themes through a Git repository and you deploy them manually. So that would be a situation where you wouldn't want to have them enabled. But with that comes a little bit more maintenance. You have to keep an eye on it more. You have to be better about checking for updates more regularly and applying those updates. And so those are things that you have to think about when it comes to your agreements with your clients. Anything that's on your site, any file that's on your site, even if you're not using it, could potentially be a vulnerability. So generally, it's a good practice to, if you have plugins and themes that you're not using, to just delete them. Perhaps you were trying out a few different plugins to manage capabilities and roles, and you found the one you like that works for you. You can delete that, and once you're done, you're not going to use it anymore. Just a nice little way to harden that and make sure it doesn't cause problems. So if you purchase any premium plugins, which can be a great way to get access to some advanced functionality that you may need, or some plugins like Yoast, we offer a premium level of support with a premium license. So it's premium plugins and themes are great, but you always want to make sure that you have a active license and you're not using like a pirated copy of that plugin. And one of the reasons for that is many of them don't allow you to apply updates if you don't have a valid license. And so in that case, you're not getting the most recent updates. You're running an old version, and you're likely not the most secure you can be because you're missing some patches potentially for vulnerabilities that have been reported. And another tip is that within the editor, you can actually, there's a way to edit the theme and plugin files themselves. But this disallow file mods is a constant that you can put in your WP config file that disables that feature. And so this would guard against, in a scenario where an administrator account was hacked and someone could log in and they could go into a plugin file and add malicious code that they wouldn't have been able to add otherwise because the files themselves are secure and you've done a good job of picking reputable plugins. But they, or the scenario I also posed earlier was, a disgruntled employee. Maybe they go in and they put a way for them to log in, even if their user account's deleted. Anything like that could possibly happen. And so locking that down is generally an okay step to take. That again, these are all just edge cases, and we're deciding what is worth it for us. Like maybe you use this file editing in the admin panel and you need that to be left. And so, which of these is valuable for you to apply to your site to promote a more secure environment? And so all of this can sound like it takes a lot of time and effort. So you want to have ways that you can automate some of this or keep an eye on it without having to go in every day and look up this stuff and review it and check it. So there are some tools that make this easy. Jetpack, which you get a license for Jetpack with a lot of our hosting offerings. It provides brute force protection. So the password databases that I mentioned earlier, where exposed passwords are provided for hackers, well, not just hackers, for people doing research and looking to check that their password is secure. Or hackers, they can grab that and they can just like continuously hit the server until they get it right. That's called a brute force attack. So they have some protection against that. They do backups. They have a firewall built in, spam protection. There's other plugins like WordFence or Solid Security that also have a firewall built in and do some malware scanning and alerts. I mentioned Stream earlier, which is an audit log of all the activity. And so maybe weekly or monthly, you could look at that. Or maybe you don't even need to look at that at all. It's just when something does come up, you're able to go back and retrace, find out what happened. There's services like Uptime Robot where there's free and paid tiers that it just pings the website and makes sure that it's up and responding with a successful status code so that you know that your site is up and running and accessible to everybody. Frequent backups are one of the most essential parts to being able to restore your website without losing any data. So when a hack happens, a lot of times the best thing to do is to restore a backup from a time when was secure, when you weren't affected by a hacker or a vulnerability. And so if you are only backing up your site once a month and you get orders every day, and your site gets hacked 29 days after the last backup, you're going to lose 29 days worth of orders and data and leads. So your ability to restore a site after you are subject to a hacker or a vulnerability is only as good as the backups that you have. So, you can be flexible with this. It's not a hard, fast rule of every hour or every day. If you have a blog and you write monthly and you don't get a lot of comments, you could maybe get away with weekly. But if you have a store and you have 10 orders a day, or you have a newspaper site that you manage that gets comments every 5 or 10 minutes, perhaps maybe every half hour or every hour, something of that. Like you have to decide what you're comfortable with the risk out there. And also, don't just back up on the server itself. There are ways to some plugins that will do backups within WordPress that they save it to the server itself in the WP content directory. And what happens if the whole server is compromised or if there's a hardware failure on the server? Generally, hosting companies will have backups and be able to restore in those situations. But if something happens, to maybe you accidentally delete a folder and it's not recoverable because of the way you deleted it, just having a backup somewhere else externally is also important. And if that second location is maybe your laptop or your external hard drive on your desk at home, fires happen, floods happen. You spill coffee on your laptop, or it gets stolen at the airport. And so generally, it's good to have at least 2, but 3 is preferable locations of a backup where it's stored. And so, possibly maybe you have on the website, and then you have you download the backups weekly and they store in your Google Drive or something like that, whatever workflow works for you there. But I also recommend looking at some services that will do it for you. So at Bluehost, we weekly will automatically, without you having to do anything, will perform a full site backup. And we also have things like Jetpack has real-time backups, where through WordPress, which is the feature in Jetpack, it will, every time there's a change, it will sync that to the third-party servers that the Jetpack service communicates with, and it will store those backups. And so you'll be able to, similar to how revisions work in WordPress, when you make changes to a post or a page, you can bounce back to a specific state of your site within that WordPress. We also have CodeGuard through Bluehost as well. So there's many options for you there as far as what you can choose. And maybe on some sites you use a certain tool, and on other sites you're more comfortable with a different tool. It all depends on the client needs and what your needs are, and how to best support you in maintaining those sites. So as an agency, I've thrown a lot at you. I've hopefully changed the way you perceive security and are going to approach security going forward. But how can you turn this into a reasonable list of things that you can do? So there's a good way to do it is to think of it as pre and post launch checklists, and also thinking ahead to the future. So before you launch a new site, have a password policy. Are you on Bluehost and using that password feature to make sure that passwords are not exposed? Maybe you use a plugin to change the required password strength that users are allowed to have on their account. To what level have you gone through and looked at the plugins and themes? Did the client give you the theme that they wanted to use? Have you vetted that? Are they up to date? Are they running the most recent versions? Perhaps check the vulnerability databases to see if there are any CVEs out there that are unpatched. Maybe it's public that they're working on a fix for something because it's been released by a hacker. There's different ways to report things. So sometimes the best way is to privately disclose it to someone. But if there's a bad actor, sometimes they do what's called a 0-day, and they will publish something without any notice. And that's particularly dangerous because then anybody can take that and they know how to exploit it, and there's no fix readily available, right? So you want to make sure there's no 0 days or anything like that out there. And to the best of your knowledge, things are as secure as they can be. You want to make sure you have your monitoring tools configured, whatever that may be, from everything I spoke about. You want to have thought about the privilege of least access, and you want to principle of least access, and you want to make sure that you know who's going to be using the site, how they're going to be using the site. You want to be confident that they have the correct access and that they're not going to be able to do things they're not supposed to. And it's worth noting that sometimes it's not even intentional. Sometimes they might accidentally go in and install a plugin and they don't know that there already is a plugin, right? So I think that's important to say, is that sometimes it's not malicious, it's accidental, and the same effects can be had of the site breaking. So that's another reason to think about that. And of course, passing along this mindset to your clients. Make sure that they're thinking about having security as front of mind, and it's a journey and something they have to constantly be thinking about. It's not something that they can pay you to do for them. They have to also participate in this process of keeping your site secure. And then I mentioned for the future. So after the site goes up, pitch security updates and monitoring as a monthly service you could offer. If they choose not to go with this type of service and where you regularly maintain the site and monitor it, make it clear that, like you can't be held responsible because the site is secure in the state that you're handing it off to them in. They might go off and have someone, a freelancer, add a feature and they add a plugin that is not secure or vulnerable, or their custom code is not written in a quality way, and someone is able to gain access to the site. And so just make sure that you're clear that, hey, if you go with us, we're willing to take responsibility for hacks that happen because we're actively participating in this security journey that you're on. But we can't, even though we built the site, it's not our responsibility if a hack happens if we're not actively participating with you. And so what you can do today, hopefully you take something away from this and you can think about your current security practices, take inventory, audit what you're doing, decide, maybe with some of this new information, you're actually not comfortable with something that you thought was secure previously, and you might want to make some adjustments. Consider you can improve your password strength policies if you feel that's something that you need to do. Perhaps you have to go through and consider what's going on with your plugins, like how they're interacting together, how reputable the developers are, and maybe you need to go in and set up some type of monitoring that you don't have, or perhaps you want to set up more regular backups or backups. If you are not setting up backups, don't have backups set up, I definitely recommend that as one of the best things you can do right now. Hopefully, has anybody ever had a site? If you've had a site that was hacked or went down, share in the comments like what that was like if you didn't have a backup, or if you did have a backup. Just share some details there about how easy or hard it was in those situations. You can go through and audit the users you have on your sites today, what access they have. You can ensure all your plugins and themes are up to date in WordPress itself. Make sure that auto updates are on. By default, WordPress will auto update all versions. You can choose to only do minor versions or both major and minor. I recommend doing all of the updates, but if you must turn off the major version updates, I recommend leaving the minor ones on, because the minor versions are the ones that contain the security updates. And so those are the most important, because as I said, when a WordPress release goes out, it's going out ideally to 43% of the internet that day. And it's a lot of attention. It draws a lot of attention to what was fixed, how it can be exploited. People are reverse engineering those fixes that were patched. And so by not applying those updates, you're leaving your site vulnerable until you do. The updates go out usually within 12 hours. The majority of WordPress sites that have auto updates enabled for a given version are updated. And so instead of 12 hours, you might turn that into 3 days if you don't get around to patching that yourself manually. So that's one of the main things I recommend, is make sure you have security updates automatically applied. And you can also audit your licenses. Like what premium plugins do you have? Are the licenses up to date? Are you receiving updates from that? Is there additional support that you could add with a higher license? Or perhaps you had a license that only had so many sites allowed on it, and you have exceeded that and you need to update your license to make sure all of your sites are receiving those updates. All of those are good things that you could do today. And I mentioned plan for the future. Outline what exactly a security monthly maintenance plan would be. Offer that for your future clients. You can sell that to your current clients as add-ons, like, hey, we've put more thought into how we're approaching this problem. Here's why security is a journey, not a destination, and how we're addressing that with this add-on. And also you can create plans for each site around what to do if the site is hacked. We have backups here and here. These people are responsible for X, Y, and Z. maybe have a couple contact people within the organization that you would work with. Each site and organization may have different things that you can use to remediate that and make sure that you get back to a secure state that you can resume taking orders or resume normal business. So yeah, I think Devin, I'm going to kick it back over to you and we're going to get to some Q&A.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, JD. A lot of information covered and a lot of really helpful information. And I'll kind of reiterate what I said at the beginning, which is I feel like security is such an important part of building a brand, building a website, helping clients. And I feel like oftentimes it is neglected until it's too late. And then everyone says, wait, I wish I would have fill in the blank, not left
Yeah.
my keys in the ignition of my car unknowingly, So we have a little
It's
bit of
kind of like
time to ask a
insurance.
few
Security, I
questions.
draw. Oh, sorry, Devin. I was just going to say, I draw a parallel to insurance with security, right? You nobody likes to pay for insurance. Insurance is there; it's expensive, and costs are going up with as prices for everything goes up. But when your car is, rear-ended by a tractor trailer or your house burns down, you're very happy that you have it. You're glad that it's there to protect you and help you recover from the effects of those disasters. So same thing. It's just in the internet realm, and it is a disaster. Your site gets hacked and goes down. Customer data may be exposed, or sales stop. That's crucial for businesses. So that's a disaster. And like we said at the beginning, it's securing livelihoods, and that's a big reason why.
Yeah. And all that to say is I applaud everyone who participated in today's webinar and asked some of these questions. Having this proactive mindset is definitely beneficial for you and your clients in the long run. So we have time for a couple questions. Let's just start with the first one I see here, which is, what's the best way to explain to clients why these vulnerabilities matter without getting too technical?
Yeah, you find like I tried to do here. Find real world situations and scenarios that you can help them realize, like, oh yeah, like I wouldn't leave my car keys on the desk. Why would I write my password on my desk? Or why would I make it easy for someone to log in and have admin access? So definitely find ways that they can relate to explain it. That we think about security every day in the physical world, and so getting them to understand it in the digital world as well. But also just helping them understand that things are always changing, and it's just important to stay on top of it and have that security first mindset. Because maybe, like I said, maybe they're a online business, right? And that's their primary means of business. They have no physical store. And so you can explain it to them like, hey, if your site gets hacked and it takes us a week to recover it, how many sales do you have a week, right? And like that's an exact dollar amount that they can see. And then at that point, security is a very important risk to consider in their business model.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I've always found it's kind of difficult to talk about the benefits without feeling like I'm trying to scare someone into something, right? But the reality is, if your site is hacked, that can be a scary situation. And the thing that came to mind is maybe just walking the client through two potential pathways. And one is, what happens if their site is hacked and they come to you to fix that, and like you have to look at the backups, and hopefully they have a clean backup. If they don't have a clean backup, how much time does it take for you to go through and find the hack and to clean it up and everything, versus how much and what it looks like and how long is their business down? Theoretically not at all, if they just pay for a maintenance package or like a security package where you are monitoring regularly and you are even if it's just performing a site audit or something like that. I think that
Yeah.
that can be helpful.
And they're hiring you because they're not the expert, and they want an expert they can trust and rely on. And like oftentimes they're busy running their business. They're doing what they need to do to have a successful website. But oftentimes that's not maintaining the website itself, right? And so ideally, I know it doesn't always work this way, but ideally you're able to find clients that trust your expertise and your recommendations. and work with you to understand why you're recommending something as important. But in the end, they just want to know roughly what's going on, but then they trust you and your services and what you're offering to them, and that you have their best interest in mind. And so, yeah, definitely try to be scary, but not too scary, right? Put it in a sense that, in a way they relate to it and that they understand that you're trying to look out for them and what's best, and you're trying to help everybody in the long run.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can be realistic without trying to be scary. I think that's maybe a good balance to strike. The next question I have is disabling file editing in the dashboard still necessary if we already use version control like Git?
Yeah, so I had mentioned that one way to keep your stuff up to date is to, if you have everything in a Git repository. If you're not familiar, Git is a software that allows you to make changes to your code while tracking those changes, when they're made, how they're made, to what files. And so some agencies will commit their plugins, all the plugins that they have, to a repository, and then they deploy that out to their web servers. Um, yes, that probably would make sense. It would probably be so if to run through it, you use that method, you would only deploy to the server when you change the repository, right? When you make updates. So theoretically, if you're updating frequently, it wouldn't matter if somebody adds code to a plugin or file theme, because it's going to get overwritten right the next time it syncs. So the window would be very small, but it doesn't hurt. I mean, in that case too, you don't want someone to be making changes to that at all because you're managing it elsewhere. So it's still a good thing you could consider there. I usually recommend, if you think that you're not going to need that at all, if you know you're not going to need that at all, to just disable it. It's just an easy thing to shut the door on, so that it's not a possible path for someone to exploit.
I like it. One or two more questions. I'm going to advance this slide. We just have a few more resources on this slide. If someone has further questions, or if they're looking for more resources, or if they want to just learn more about how to work on their website, I think we've got time for one, maybe two more questions. The next question is: are auto updates safe to use on all plugins, or should we limit them to a certain category?
Yeah, I mentioned before that I recommend turning it on for all of them, just because of that. Um, you get all the updates. You don't have to sit there and examine whether it's a security update, whether you need to apply it urgently or not. That said, it's a balance, like I described. You ideally are only using plugins from reputable companies and developers, but there are the odd chances that you find a really niche plugin that does something specific that's not really popular or well uh, demanded for, like high demands. So yeah, it will depend on everybody's individual preference and their risk tolerance and all that. But yeah, I generally do recommend leaving it all on. You just have to, again, make individual decisions based on what your risk tolerance is and how confident you are in the developers and maintainers of those plugins.
Awesome. And the last question that I'll ask is this one: what metrics or KPIs can we use to prove the ROI of security services to clients?
Yeah, oftentimes this is a tough one because often there is no ROI, right? It's like I mentioned, it's an insurance policy. And so just like we have to decide what level of risk tolerance we have with the different steps we take to secure the site, and what we're willing to allow our users to do, and all the different factors. They also have to decide what it's worth to them to be able to recover from a disaster where their site is hacked and their business is down and their site is down, and the world is no longer able to do business with them. So yeah, again, that's a tough one. There's no direct ROI, but it's more about the value of the service and understanding what the impact of a hack would be to their business. It's like a theoretical ROI, I guess. It would be a good way to put it.
Awesome. Well, I believe that brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar. So thank you so much for joining us, JD, and for sharing your expertise and your experience. Thank you for everyone who participated and engaged. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we really do want to focus on having these be helpful webinars and educational and helping you as you're building your brand and helping your clients build their brands. So thank you to everyone that participated. And again, thank you, JD, for stopping by.
Yeah, one thing I'll just add one more thing is just that um, just like choosing the plugins and themes that you decide to use on your website, your hosting provider is another very important thing to consider with security. And so, like I mentioned a bunch of times, that Bluehost, we do a lot behind the scenes to help you in this journey of security to make sure that you remain secure and things are configured the correct way. And so, make sure that you're considering that, and hopefully you consider Bluehost and remain our customer for many years.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. I'll talk to y'all soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.